What's up everyone? Alex here. Can you believe that it's been a whole year since Kazuma Kiryu's last adventure? Yakuza 6 The Song of Life was released on April 17th, 2018, and what started a whole year filled with games from RGG Studio. I recall reviewing the game last year and remembering being surprised by the actual premise of the game. Somehow, I was able to avoid all of Sega's promotional materials, screenshots, and trailers leading up to receiving my review copy of Yakuza 6. So imagine my surprise at what I found within the first hour of the game. Of course, I won't spoil what the actual premise of the story is. I'll leave it for newcomers to find out for themselves. But Yakuza 6 was the game that made me want to ensure that all my reviews moving forward would have a similar approach of not spoiling too much of a game's story and leaving a lot of the surprises for players to discover. What's not a surprise, however, is that Yakuza 6 was yet another solid entry to the Yakuza franchise, with its signature storytelling punctuated by lots of fighting and the requisite minigames the series has been known for. One of the more daring minigames found in Yakuza 6 is a live chat with real-life AV models reacting to Kazuma Kiryu's advances. That might sound titillating at first, but when you begin reading the accompanying chat room in said minigame, you'll find lots of funny dialogue and a surprising amount of character development in it. In an interview with Scott Strickert, Yakuza's localization producer at Sega, he revealed that the person responsible for all the localization work in live chat was none other than John Riesenbach, one of Sega's junior localization producers. To celebrate Yakuza 6's one-year anniversary, I conducted an email interview with John to talk about his work on Yakuza 6 live chat. And don't worry, we'll be talking about the inclusion of the Lenny face as well. Since this is an email interview, I'll be showing the questions on the video and I'll be reading his responses to said questions. But feel free to view this video however way you want. Either way, it'll be a fun and educational interview, and a must-see for both fans of the series and anyone who's interested in getting into localization. Hey, thanks for asking me to do this. My name is John Riesenbach, and I'm currently working as a junior localization producer at Sega of America and Atlas USA. I've been in the industry for about 4.5 years now, all with Sega and Atlas, a period over which I've worked in QA, editing, and now producing, which still seems to involve a lot of editing, as it were. Not that I'm complaining. The goal for any and all sections of our Yakuza localization is a bit of a two-headed snake, if you will. First off, we have to consider the original intent of the Japanese writing. What's the point each individual line is trying to get across, and, on a larger scale, what's the scene as a whole trying to get across? Preserving that intent is key. Secondly, we try to think about how to make the dialogue as fun, interesting, and natural in English as possible. Occasionally, we'll have to rewrite jokes, shift the order of lines, inject extra characterization, and more for the sake of making the English text really pop. But again, all of that is done with the original Japanese intent at the forefront of our minds. Specifically for live chat, I wanted as much as possible to show people that the minigame could be more than just an adult film star taking her clothes off. It was clear from the original Japanese that the chat log on the side was meant to accomplish this with its humor, but the execution of it was naturally done in a way that would resonate more with Japanese players, presumably players who are familiar with those kinds of platforms in particular. I needed a way to replicate that feeling for our Western audience, which ultimately resulted in the crazy and occasional meme-spouting denizens of the live chat rooms. One thing people might have noticed is that in addition to a user's character, Sexbot9000 always talking about robots, or Veteran Drinker constantly bringing up his ex-wife, I made sure that the typing style was consistent for each user. Some are more typo-prone, while others have perfect grammar and punctuation. And that maps onto reality pretty well. I think we all have that one friend who insists on capitalizing and punctuating every sentence they type no matter what, whereas some people tend to be more casual with how they present themselves online. I promise that I'm not drawing inspiration from actual live chat sites. Honestly, just seeing how people interact with each other on sites like Twitter and Reddit, and to some extent in groups with friends and coworkers, provided the perfect backdrop to what the live chat messages became. It's difficult to pinpoint any singular inspiration for how I handled it, but the years I'd spent prior soaking in internet forums certainly didn't hurt. That depends on how you define free reign. I suppose this was a mix of both, as long as I was following the two localization tenets I mentioned earlier. A. Holding true to the Japanese intent, and B. Crafting fun, interesting natural English. Pretty much anything went. Of course, quote-unquote anything is a bit of a misnomer. Everything still goes through a cross-check process, and every step of the way, I was communicating with our translator to make sure that I was carrying over the intent in the best possible way. You can see the results of some of this with the usernames present in the chat rooms. They're all loosely grounded in what they were in Japanese, but pumped to the max with internet weirdness. Sexbot9000, for example, was originally Fusion Robo in Japanese, while Rock Lobster 420 was originally just Lobster in Japanese. I should probably make a note here and say that I don't advocate memes or references in 99.9% of localizations. They tend to date a game to a specific year or time period, when ideally, a game and its writing should be timeless. But with Yakuza 6 specifically taking place in late 2016, it had already dated itself in a way, and what would an internet chat room be without a spicy meme or two? In my opinion, this was one of the very few situations where that kind of writing is exactly what you want out of the localization. Back on topic though, most of the personality that came out in the chat I had to inject myself. As I mentioned earlier, the characters themselves, as well as the jokes they made, resonated perfectly well with the Japanese audience, but would have likely fallen flat if we had just gone with a straight translation. I ended up keeping the general characterizations from the original Japanese, but cranking them up to 11 to really give them strong, unique identities. As for the lines themselves, it was about a 50-50 mix of sticking close to the translation and pushing a little further away for the sake of the English. It wasn't super challenging to balance real life and believability in the game, to be perfectly honest. Yakuza as a series really prides itself on just how grounded in reality it is. You can see that in the locations, most of which you can actually visit in Japan, countless tie-ins with real-world brands, commentary on current social issues, and more. Not to mention live chat itself. It's rare nowadays for a game to use full motion video. The two live chat girls represented here are actual, and rather famous, Japanese adult film stars, so that alone grounds this minigame in the real world in a way that most other games simply don't do. Not only that, but the site that Kiru visits for this particular section of the game is in fact a very real, very 18+ live chat site. You can even type the URL from the minigame into your web browser and it'll take you to a site that looks virtually identical to the one you see in the game, though their English is a little different from ours. There was a little challenge with how the game represented it though, specifically the image of Kiru in the corner hitting each individual key with one finger as the player inputs a button. I had originally considered making each button press 2 or even 3 letters, so that I'd be able to fit more text in there. But having Kiru clack away meticulously key by key forced me to keep 1 letter per button press, hence why his responses are so short, 13 letters or less, including punctuation and spaces. From the perspective of Kiryu's character, his character's development is entirely handled by having his responses be fixed. The player is engaged and pressing buttons that make him type, but there is no player choice or dialogue selection whatsoever in live chat. In a way, the limitation that I discussed earlier about keeping his responses short helped keep Kiryu's character coming through in a minigame that is, at face value, not really about characterization. But when you think about the fact that he's a 48-year-old man who has little to no experience with technology, both due to personal choice and all those years spent in prison, and is coming across the concept of live chat for the first time in his life, it's not much of a surprise that he can't really think of better things to say than boobs or talking about his banana. He's not going to be getting on that live chat website writing essays to these girls. It's tough enough for him to use a keyboard, let alone wax eloquent about how someone looks. That's just another touch from RGG Studios demonstrating the synergy between character and gameplay. As for the other users in the chat room, I really focused on making them as distinct and interesting as possible. Like I mentioned before, this came across in various forms: writing style, typo frequency, emoji usage, topic of conversation, etc. And while they don't really have story arcs, I think all of those aspects come together to make each user memorable in their own way, though some more memorable than others. The first and most noticeable of these is the Lenny face, which honestly started as a dumb half-suggestion, half-joke to Scott, our lead localization producer for the game. But the more I thought about it, the more serious it got. Eventually, the road ahead for poor Lenny was not exactly the smoothest. We originally thought that we could just put it in the text as is, and everything would work out fine. But upon receiving a build, we realized it was showing up as something closer to this. Funny in its own way, but obviously not what we wanted. What followed was a series of back and forths between Scott and the devs, in which Scott, with some prodding from me, had to defend our desire to get this thing in there and functioning. At the end of all of it, the developers made a two-piece graphic that we had to then code into our text. It was a long and arduous process for everyone involved, but I don't think live chat would have been the same without it. A second, much more drastic change happened in the form of the button prompts and timings of Kiru's responses. Before localization even started on the project, we had identified this as a potential problem. You can pack a lot more into a few letters in Japanese than you can in English, so we knew we were going to have to add letters onto Kiru's responses in most cases. What this ended up meaning was, for every single one of Kiru's responses, I had to come up with A, the right words for him to say, B, the buttons the player would be pushing in order to type those words, and C, how long the player would have to input the right combo. This was further complicated by the Japanese occasionally mirroring the words in the buttons themselves. The phrase doki doki, the onomatopoeia for a heartbeat, for example, was entered by alternating between the X and circle buttons, which, when done rhythmically enough, can mimic a heartbeat. I knew that trying to match these tricks exactly would be impossible, so I instead focused on making the prompts feel as satisfying as possible, whether that was through repeated mashing of the same button, rotation around the 4 face buttons, or a tricky combo for the player to pull off. Consistency was also important to me, at least for special characters. The spacebar was always represented by the triangle button, while punctuation was always square. I don't think many people consciously notice those kinds of things during gameplay, but it helps the minigame feel real, even when it's just a small part of a massive video game world. As an end note, this portion of the game took a good week and a half or 2 weeks of work time to perfect. I probably watched each of those videos at least 10 times, maybe more. Nothing feels quite strange as sitting in the middle of a crowded office having people strip on your screen all day, let me tell you. But all in all, it was worth the effort. I'm super happy with how it turned out, and hope everyone enjoyed that section of the game, as well as the rest. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank John Riesenbach, Scott Strickert, John Stiebel and Sega PR, and the rest of Sega of America for making this interview happen. And I'd also like to thank the many Sega and Yakuza fans for supporting the series, and helping make sure that we see Kazuma Kiryu's journey to its conclusion. Onward! To Judgment in July! Thanks for watching this video. If you like what you watched, please consider supporting me by liking and sharing the video, posting a comment, and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you won't miss any of my new videos. Also, follow me on Twitter at @MyBacklogBattle for the latest updates on upcoming videos, or to just chat about video games. Thanks for stopping by, and let's all have fun playing video games.